Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our meeting. I call to order the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting of the University of Houston System Board of Regents. The first item requiring committee approval today are the minutes from the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting held on August 20, 2015 and November 19, 2015. Are there any corrections to these minutes? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes as distributed?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. The minutes are hereby approved. We have 8 items which will be presented before the committee today, and 1 item requiring committee and board approval. The remaining 7 items are for information only. Our Chief Audit Executive, Mr. Don Guyton, will present these items. If anyone has any questions during the presentation of these, please let me know. Mr. Guyton, will you please give your report?
Thank you, Regent Welder. We had no open points from the November committee meeting. Item C on page 6 on your iPad refers to suggested changes to Board of Regents Policy 55.01 contracts. These changes to the policy are in paragraph 51.01.4, reporting to the board. With the implementation of Senate Bill 20 on procurement, the board is now required to approve all contracts over $1 million. As a result, this paragraph has been changed to report actual expenditures rather than the amounts of contracts awarded. These revisions to this policy were discussed in the November 19th committee meeting when we presented the last annual report on procurement. The changes to this policy are brought to the Board of Regents for approval. Do you have any questions on these red line changes in the policy?
So if we signed a $2 million 3-year contract, then it would only relate to the amount spent in any given year if it
Yeah,
was?
you get an annual report every year. The way that the policy was worded, that we would report all of the awards, not expenditures, but awards. So you're already approving all significant contracts, all contracts over $1 million. This will tell you how much you spent on any contract over $1 million. In some cases, you'll have a contract where you approve expenditures, sometimes years before the actual project takes place. This is really a more current reporting to the board on actual expenditures. And it should result in more meaningful information.
We did discuss it at the last meeting, and there was consensus that the committee go this direction, so this is just putting it in, this is basically implementing it. Any other questions? Should we go ahead and vote on this one now, shouldn't we?
I think you should go.
Do I hear a motion to approve this action item as presented?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The item is hereby approved. Do I have a motion to place this item approved by the committee on the board's consent docket agenda for the final board approval?
So moved.
A motion?
Second.
And a second, thank you. Any discussion on that? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. The following item will be placed on the board's consent docket agenda for the final board approval at our board meeting held later today as follows. Report on Board of Regents Policy 55.01 Contracts, UH System. Mr. Guyton, would you please continue with your reports?
Yes, sir. Item D on page 10 of your iPad refers to a proposal to create a system police operation for efficiencies and standardization. During the past few years, police operations have been scrutinized for their practices in dealing with various situations. Many of these situations deal with use of force, and some higher education institutions have had to deal with consequences of their institutions' policies in these areas. At the University of Houston system, our police departments are inconsistent. Our policies in our police departments are inconsistent in this area, the use of force, and other areas. What is acceptable at one institution, a practice at one institution, may not be acceptable at another institution. The risk to our system should be lowered by having consistent policies while striving to achieve the best practices. I believe this can best be accomplished by having a system police operation. A system police operation offers us the best opportunity to economize our resources by using common systems for dispatching, records management, evidence management, and property management. Areas that should be standardized are training, vehicle fleets, and uniforms, and various other types of things. When we issued our audit report on police operations in 2003, we hoped that having a system policy on police operations would be the start of a standardized management system of police resources, but this has not been the case. This report is presented to you today for information as a preliminary proposal for a police system operation. Management will be collaborating with the presidents, CFOs, and police chiefs over the next 2 months and present a final proposal at the May committee meeting. Donna Cornell, would you like to comment on this?
This is just something that we've been looking at for some time. As Don says, this was kind of talked about as far back as 2003, some type of consolidation. In looking across the country at the large loss reports from a lawsuit standpoint, I see the police department as a high-risk area and an area that we need to be sure that there is some standardization, if you will, between the different campuses. And I'm a little concerned if we don't have more standardization that we will have more exposure. I'm also cognizant of the need for smoother personnel movement between departments, which could be possible with one commissioning system, and also Clery compliance, which is an issue that we've recently been reviewed by the Department of Education, and whether we have the processes in place on each campus, or the policies and procedures on each campus to make sure we have Clery compliance, which is another very high-risk area for us. I think this is a good idea, but I do think it's important that we get input from each of the campuses to make sure that there's still autonomy on each campus to deal with the uniqueness of their particular campus.
Okay.
And
Any questions on what
what-
Donna was saying?
and why not include Victoria in the,
Victoria's police department is there's not a separate police department at Victoria. They are supervised, and the officers that are there are supervised out of the UH campus.
got it, okay, so there's already consistency there.
Correct.
Why is that, Donna? Why was it set up differently?
Because it's so small, and originally it was handled by the city police department, and as it grew, that's when we placed officer in that location. And it was also part of becoming a residential campus.
I would assume that university police officers are trained to deal with students differently than the police department from the city of Victoria.
Correct.
But you cut them a little bit of slack because they are college.
Correct. It's better to have, the chiefs on each of the campuses are aware of the unique nature of policing on a university campus, especially with residential, those that have residential populations. It can be challenging at times. They're young people, exploring their freedom, And the police department, I think, is
It's a nice way to
aware
say
of the different things that go on.
I know that it is what it is. I mean, it's no different than I probably have 100 police officers working for me somewhere on any night, and they're dealing with my customers, and you cut them a little slack, because there aren't those three customers, there aren't those three students.
Right. That's correct.
Well, I know that from an audit perspective, this is being considered for a long period of time, something like 13 years now. I personally, support the concept of implementing this change. Do you have a timeline in mind, or is there any kind of a strategy for implementation?
I think it's really going to depend on working with the different campuses.
So how do they feel about it, Donna?
I think there's some concern that there won't be the autonomy on each campus. I mean, I think that they want to make sure that they have, each campus president has control over his or her own campus, and there may be some concern that they lose some of that control when there is a system police operation. And I think we need to, as we discuss it, we need to make sure we can meet those concerns.
Many people have two bosses. You make it work.
Well, I know one thing for sure, no matter what, we need to be consistent with the Department of Education's rules on clery reporting. When we did our report in 2003, we found very inconsistent reporting. We even had, at one time, murders of Andrea Yates' children reported in our Clear Lake report, which was not consistent with the Department of Ed rules at all. And these types of things, standardization for not only Department of Ed, but also use of force. If you allow someone to be tasered at one campus and not another, you allow long guns in one campus and not another, I think you are at risk by allowing those inconsistencies.
I assume this is standard policy at all universities, that they answer under one, or is it not? Is it inconsistent?
Well, when we looked at, everybody's a little different. I will tell you that the University of Texas does have a system police operation. Not every, A&M does not. So there are some differences.
Okay.
I actually have a conference call with the other system general counsels across the state, and this is one of the things on our list for next week. So we're going to be talking
So
about
this is something that we basically decide is what fits best for us?
Correct.
Okay. And whose initial recommendation was this?
This came out of the audit report that Don made
Okay.
in 2003.
I think the environment lately is becoming way too charged about these issues. There are very many issues here. There's a balance issue as to how do we make sure that the service is localized and right, at the same time liability and exposure is reduced. So we would have finished it for this meeting, but I thought it would be a good idea to just take just a few more months,
Okay.
but we'll finish it. It will be here in May for the board.
Okay. Spencer?
Are there any issues or concerns with common practices in regard to concealed carry?
We'll be bringing the campus carry policies to the board in May, and there will be uniqueness, there will be consistency on the major issues, obviously with compliance with the law. There are specific categories that are excluded by other laws, and so you will see that look the same on each campus. There will be some uniqueness with regard to each campus just because of the campus environment and the types of buildings, the type of research, the type of, if they have residential areas or not. So there'll be some differences, but there will be a very serious set of common areas that you'll find. And I think you will also see commonality across the state when the campuses everywhere are looking at this.
Other questions or comments on this subject?
Quick question. Who would the police commissioner report up to?
I would say the Vice Chancellor of Finance and Administration. But that's not my call.
Right. I think from other campuses, they'll definitely have a dual responsibility, one reporting to the police system level police chief, and who will report to the way we have right now, which is the vice chancellor for A&F right now. And they'll also report for their local sensitivities to, I think, the presidents on their campuses.
Does that answer your question?
Sure, I mean, it's still a work in progress, right? I mean, we'll get a final
Yes,
thing.
I think
in
we
this.
still have some more discussion on that particular piece, how to make it work, but by May, we'll bring it to you.
Okay.
Is that standard, Donna, that it would answer to the Vice President of Finance and Administration,
Mhm.
Yes,
Right.
not General Counsel?
no,
Since most things turn into legal issues.
no.
Why does it fall under there? Just
This is part of the
briefly.
business operations of a campus, would typically always be under administration of finance or business operations.
I think they call it finance, but it's really operations. It's more like a COO position.
Right. Yes.
Not the provost, but it's really kind of a COO. Everything that goes on is a title, just sounds a little.
Other questions? All right, Don.
All right, our next item on the agenda, item E, on page 12 of your iPad, refers to the report on the emergency management, safety, and security audit of the University of Houston system. This report is required every 3 years by the Texas Education Code, sections 51.217. This is the second time this report has been presented to the Board of Regents, and it will be transmitted to the Governor's Office of Emergency Management. I'd like to introduce Ms. Kelly Boyson, the UH Director of Emergency Management, to make this presentation. Thank you, Kelly.
Good morning.
Good morning, welcome.
Can you hear me?
Can.
This mic's not made for short people.
Great.
As Don said, my name's Kelly Boyson. I'm the Director of Emergency Management here at U of H. And our office was asked by Internal Audit to coordinate and facilitate this emergency management, safety, and security audit, which was conducted in the fall of 2015. So briefly, I'm going to go over how the audit was conducted and then share some of the findings with you. As Don also stated, the audit is required by Texas Education Code 51.217, and it does have to be conducted every 3 years. So the last one was done in 2012. Now, the findings must be reported to the institution's Board of Regents and then also submitted to the State Division of Emergency Management of the Office of the Governor. Now, the audit criteria for this particular audit is 2 main codes out of the Texas Education Code. The first one, the one we've already mentioned, that outlines the requirements for a campus's multi-hazard emergency operations plan. It also outlines the requirements for the safety and security audit itself. The second part of the Texas Education Code 51.218 outlines the requirements for a campus emergency alert system. And the last requirement for the audit is out of a policy out of the State Office of Risk Management called the Texas Continuity Policy. Now, I want to mention that this is a new requirement since the last audit that was done in 2012. So these requirements came out in October of 2013, and it's specifically in regard to a campus business continuity planning program. A couple of different appendices that you'll see in the audit report itself. One of them you'll find in Appendix C, which begins on page 33. That's where you'll find the audit tool that was used to conduct the audit. Now, this tool was revised to reflect all of the new requirements, and then we also reached out to other universities across the state of Texas for best practices to incorporate in this updated audit tool. The tool was then distributed to each of the University of Houston system component campuses, and they were asked to provide, to do a self-assessment and then provide that to the peer review team who was conducting the audit. So on Appendix A, which is on page 22, you'll see a full listing of the peer review teams. These teams were made up of different emergency management professionals from the various component campuses, as well as each campus was asked to reach out to an emergency management expert in their local jurisdiction. So that could be a city or county office of emergency management or another agency in their local jurisdiction. Now, the on-site campus visits were conducted during September of last year, and then the findings, which you can find in your report on Appendix D, which begins on page 41. Those findings were then provided to each of the campuses, and the campuses were then asked to provide a response for any area that was noted as either not in place, or the peer review teams also provided recommendations for improvement. So each campus was also asked to respond to any of those recommendations as well. And in their response, they were asked to include an action plan, a expected completion date, as well as a responsible party. And you can see all of the responses in Appendix B on page 23. And then all of this is compiled into the report itself, which you see here today, and that's also the one that will go to the State Division of Emergency Management. Okay, so let's talk briefly about an overview of some of the findings. Now, I know, let's see, this is on, it should be on page 5, I believe. So if you guys turn there, the print is rather small, so bear with me. But you'll see a table which shows each campus and then a comparison from what occurred in 2012 and then also what was found in 2015. Where you see a check mark, that means that the campus fully complied with that requirement. Where you see IP, they were in progress. NP, not in place. And then NR stands for not rated in the 2012 audit. And that's going to be for those business continuity planning requirements, since the requirement didn't come out until 2013. So just from a quick glance, what you're going to see is that based on the number of check marks you'll see in the 2015 field, that significant improvements have been made across the board at all of the different component campuses in the last 3 years, specifically in regard to their development of emergency plans, as well as emergency exercises and their training programs. Now, I do want to highlight a couple of areas that are still needing a little bit of improvement. These recent requirements regarding continuity planning from State Office of Risk Management have been a challenge for several of the campuses to implement. You'll notice that a few of the campuses show this item as either in progress or not in place. And one other area that the peer review teams noted for several of the campuses is that staffing dedicated strictly to emergency management has still been a challenge for a couple of the campuses. That being said, there still have been improvements made in that area. As you can see, in 2012, the only campus that did have a full-time position dedicated to emergency management was the UH campus. So there have been improvements since then, but still some of the peer review teams made recommendations in regard to adding staffing strictly dedicated to emergency management. And then a very last slide just has a summary of all the contents in the report. And that's all I have, and I'll take any questions at this time.
Any questions? Committee members?
You said there was some reasons why they're having difficulties implementing the checks. What are some of the reasons?
So what some of the peer review teams, and this is specifically to those new continuity planning requirements, and I do want to note that while that requirement came out in 2013, the dates for completion, most of those were in 2014 and 2015. So what a lot of the peer review teams noticed is that there is either someone who is responsible for emergency management, but maybe wears a lot of other hats and isn't strictly dedicated to emergency management, or some of the campuses do have a director specifically for emergency management identified, but they're juggling all these other requirements in regard to developing the campus-wide emergency plans, training programs, exercises, you name it. So the staffing piece continually came up as a challenge as to why not all of those areas were being complied with.
So what's the plan on getting them complied with?
Well, so these responses are provided from each campus, and that outlines what each campus's specific action plan is to be compliant in those areas. Specifically in regard to staffing, I can't speak for the other campuses in those areas, but most of them said that they're going to evaluate whether they can provide funding for an additional position.
So who's got the point for those other campuses to make sure that's done? Who's in charge? Who's accountable to us to come in and say either I've got it done or I don't have it done and here's what I need and here's my deadline to get it done?
Sure. So from what I understand about the structure at the other campuses as well is that most of the directors of emergency management report, they're in the division of A&F, and several of them report directly to the CFO of that campus.
Okay. And then I saw UHV does not have a FTE for this?
That's correct.
And who's filling that role? One of these people with the different hats?
Yes, so actually, that gentleman is a colleague of mine. I've worked with him for the last 4 years, and I think personally he's doing an excellent job with all the different hats that he's wearing. And unfortunately, he actually just retired this past month. So that's included in UH Victoria's responses, that they're going to be looking into hiring a replacement and looking at a specific director of emergency management for that position in the future.
So Don, Peter has a good point. So who will give us an update, or when will an update be given? Or have the different campuses been given a timeline? Whether it's an FTE or coming back in compliance?
We can put these items in our follow-up database and report on them in our, like we do the other audit reports.
I'm having one more question. At any time, was the our police departments involved in any of this, or did they give any input? It just seems like it makes a match to have them give input.
So, great question. So this is just specifically in regard to the requirements for emergency management. It's of course a best practice that all of the emergency operations plan that these campuses have incorporate any of their first responders on their campus into the planning. But for the audit itself, it was specific to the emergency management requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Where do we stand technology-wise in emergency management? Are we up to date or behind the curve, or?
Well, so there's a lot of different technology systems that we use in emergency management, from what we call an incident management system, and there's also one of the most important ones is the campus's emergency alert systems. I can tell you that as far as the campus emergency alert system, all of the different campuses utilize the same vendor, the same system, but they operate it independently. And the University of Houston system has made a contract with a new vendor. And so they're working on implementing that because they did find that there were several improvements that could be made for that alert system. So that's in the works as we speak. And then the different campuses use different types of what we call incident management systems. It's basically a tool to have a more effective and efficient response. And so the different campuses use different systems for that currently.
So should we consider using this same system at each campus? Is that?
I'm always a proponent of standardization for, to increase efficiency. And, just like with the police item that was just discussed, there is not currently a system function for emergency management across the component campuses either. And so I think anywhere where we can kind of promote that standardization, since we all have the same requirements, and of course leaving the autonomy at the same time, because that's still a very important trait to the specific campuses.
So I just wanted to comment on that because I think both are very good questions. For Regent Taft's question, the plan includes a specific date of completion of each of those action items that are found to be either in progress or not completed with a responsible party. So it will all get followed up on that particular thing. On your thing in terms of standardization, what I have observed in 8 years, a lot of emergencies are very localized emergencies. Let's say if it is related to a storm or a hurricane, and not all campuses get impacted in the same way, but everything does flow through with the constant line of communication, even 3 a.m. calls, because I'm on those calls, I know, and which includes, so the Vice Chancellor of Administration, or CEO, as we can understand, completely is in the loop, as well as, you know, our emergency for U of H or the system level. So, I mean, I haven't felt that way, but maybe there might be 1 or 2 areas in terms of policies how we can standardize, but I think a lot of emergencies have been very campus-specific in this sense. Right, Donna, would you
Yes.
say that?
Even with something as dramatic as a hurricane, what needs to happen at Clear Lake is very different than what needs to happen at UH downtown or even this campus. It's just, it's surprising, but I will tell you that's true.
And also, law sort of gives authority to the presidents to, let's say, close the campus or reopen the campus, not to the chancellor per se, or, you know, so, but the presidents always keep me in the loop, that this is what we are planning to do. So, I mean, I have not felt on that piece that we really needed to have it in standardized system.
Yeah, I was just thinking more of a technology standpoint,
Yeah, sure.
that to have people trained here in the same system that are also at Clear Lake, that if there was a big emergency and we had to loan some people or you know, or
Yes, a good idea.
that everybody would be, you know, speaking the same language. That's my only thought.
Yes, sir.
The audit findings are reported to the governor's office as well? Did they? have they
It will
provided
be
feedback?
after this meeting.
Okay. And then they come in and give feedback on what, if they're concerned about anything?
Well, so what's happened in the past, and you'll see that in the Texas Education Code in 51.217, it says that this audit has to be done with guidance from the Division of Emergency Management with the state. So in 2012, we reached out to them and said, what's the guidance that you would like us to follow in conducting this audit? And in 2012, they said, well, like many other things, we don't have any guidance at this time. So we reached out again in 2015, you know, to the state and said, can you provide, is there any guidance for the audit, for conducting the audit? And we got the same answer, and they basically said, just reach out to other state universities and follow best practices, because right now we don't have the staffing to actually review all of the state universities' emergency plans. And so we submit the report in hoping that maybe they'll read it and give us some feedback, but unfortunately, we haven't seen that in the past.
So are we hoping that when we make this report that we will then get someone's attention and get some feedback? Because, I mean, I think it would be important to get the state's
Absolutely.
feedback. They're,
Well, I can tell you, I was here in 2012 when we did the last audit, and when we first reached out to them, they had a hard time giving us a point of contact for exactly who this audit report should go to. So, you know, like I said, it's my hope that we can get some feedback, as I agree. I think it would be incredibly beneficial.
you've done great work. I really appreciate it. But I don't know, and nothing against you at all,
Sure.
or you don't. I don't know, I've got some worry that this loop has not been tied, and that because this is one of those things that you don't think about, and hopefully we never have to deal with, but when it happens, if it's not done right, you know, people can be hurt, and I think we've got to make sure we get this right, or get every resource on it that we can, and every bit of help we can.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree, and I think the reporting to the state is reporting, but I think the responsibility lies on us here, just to make sure that we have everything in place. So we'll bring the report back to see all other pieces are fixed, and we'll take one more look at the emergency management meeting for the system level to just see where the holes might be and what else we need to do. I mean, I'm just saying, we need to just stay on top of it ourselves.
So he'll come back, we'll get something back in
Yeah,
May.
we
about where
we
we're
can
at.
bring it back, whatever the dates are on that.
We can populate our follow-up database with the action items, and we'll keep it in the loop.
Okay. Yeah, if we could get something back in
Mhm.
May, just where we are, reset, what progress has been made, that'd be
Okay.
good.
Just another quick note, is there anybody at Harris County, the commissioners level or the commissioners level that we might reach out to just to kind of keep them in the
sure.
loop as well?
So, and that was one of the reasons why we reached out to, this time for the audit, we requested a representative from either city or county emergency management for that coordination piece. I can tell you, I can speak for U of H, since we fall within City of Houston and Harris County. We coordinate with City of Houston Office of Emergency Management and the Mayor's Office and Harris County's Office of Emergency Management as well on a regular basis. And we incorporate them within our planning processes as well. So that definitely takes place, when we're developing these plans.
Very good questions, everybody, and a good presentation. Thank you for
Thank you.
being
Thanks,
here,
thank you.
and we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, item F, on page 53 of your iPads, refers to the Board of Regents' internal audit, institutional compliance, and identity theft policies. The Audit Committee Planner, item 3.03, requires an annual review of the Board of Regents policies, these Board of Regents policies. There have been no suggested changes to the institutional compliance and identity theft policies since they were reviewed by the Audit and Compliance Committee on February 19th of 2015. There was one change to the internal audit policy approved by the Audit and Compliance Committee on August the 20th of 2015, and there were no suggested changes to this policy at this time. Do you have any questions on those policies? I'd like to point out a couple of things about the Board of Regents Internal Audit Policy 4101 on page 53. This policy serves as the internal audit charter and establishes a framework of the internal audit function. Paragraph 4101.2C, page 54 of this policy requires the internal auditing department to adhere to the standards for the professional practice of internal auditing and the Institute of Internal Auditors Code of Ethics. Internal Audit Standard 1010 requires the Chief Audit Executive to discuss the definition of internal auditing and the Code of Ethics and the standards with the board and senior management. This paragraph of this policy, paragraph 41.01.1C, is the definition of internal auditing that states, internal auditing is an independent, objective, assurance, and consulting activity designed to add value and improve the system's operations. It helps the system accomplish its objectives by bringing a systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. The Code of Ethics establishes four principles that internal auditors are expected to apply and uphold: integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, and competency. The Code of Ethics contains 12 specific rules of conduct for these principles. Each year, all of our audit staff, including myself, read the Code of Ethics and sign a statement acknowledging their responsibilities to adhere to this code. The IA standards are comprised of attribute standards and performance standards. The attribute standards are purpose, authority, and responsibility, independence and objectivity, impairment to independence and objectivity, due professional care, and quality assurance and improvement program. The performance standards are managing the internal audit activity, the nature of the work, engagement planning, performing the engagement, communicating acceptance of risk, monitoring progress, and resolution of senior management's acceptance of risk. Standard 1310, the requirements for the quality assurance program, requires the program to include both internal and external assessments. Every 3 years, the internal audit department undergoes an internal assessment and an external peer review to determine whether the department adheres with these standards. The last peer review report was issued in August of 2015, and that was on the agenda for the November 2015 meeting. Do you have any questions on the definition of internal auditing, the Code of Ethics, or the standards? Are there any suggestions to changes in the policies? No, we'll move on to the next item. Item G, page 58 of your iPad, refers to 5 external audit reports for fiscal year 2015. The independent CPA's report on the application of agreed-upon procedures of the athletic department, that's on page 59 of your iPad. The audit report on the financial statements of the charter school, that's on page 83 of your iPad. The audit report on, and the financial statements of the UHS Endowment Fund, that's on page 151 of the iPad. The UHD financial statements and independent audit reports for the SACS accreditation, that's on page 183. And agreed upon procedures report for UH's Cancer Prevention and Research Institute grant awards for FY15, that's on page 230 of the iPad. The other supplemental information has been excluded from the endowment fund financial statement, and this information includes a schedule of non-current investments and schedule of changes in net asset by endowment. These schedules are on file with the board office with a complete set of these financial statements. The financial statements of the charter school were approved by the charter school board at its meeting on January 19th, 2016. This year, we had 2 CPA firms engaged to prepare the reports for these engagements. We had Belt, Harris, Paycheck, and BKD. Belt, Harris, Paycheck conducted the engagements for athletic and the charter school, and BKD conducted the engagements for endowment, UHD SACS, and the CPRIT grant awards. You've been provided with bios of the audit partners, and they're here today to give you brief presentations on their reports. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Robert Belt of Belt, Harris, and Paycheck.
Good afternoon. Robert Belt with Belt, Harris, Paycheck. Very pleased to be here with you today. We're first presenting the National Collegiate Athletics Agreed Upon Procedures. These are procedures that are required by the NCAA, specifically to the athletics program. Very pleased to announce that we did not have any significant findings as a result of our review. We looked into approximately 36 areas that are required by the NCAA that we look at. And generally, just paraphrasing our findings, we found that everything was well managed and consistent with a well-managed athletics program. The next report I was going to cover with you is the charter school. The charter school is a very unique element within the university. Just point out to you really quickly that there's approximately 1,300 school districts in the state of Texas. There's approximately 600 charter schools, and there's 7 charter schools that are sponsored by universities. So it's a very unique type entity that you're dealing with here. We audit 5 of the 7 university-sponsored charter schools in the state of Texas, and these charter schools serve a very important role in connection with your education department in providing a test bed and a laboratory, if you will, to go out there and to implement new educational programs. Also point out that it is a unmodified opinion on our report, what's the highest level of assurance we can provide that all the disclosures required by generally accepted accounting principles have been included and that the financial statements are correct. And also, we did not have any significant management type findings with the charter school program. That concludes my report. I'd be more than happy to entertain any questions the board may have.
Any questions for Mr. Belt? We appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Brian Kruger and Greg Sissel of BKD.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Kruger with BKD. Greg Sissel, my other partner, is back here. Just a few brief comments for you on the 3 engagements we did for you all, the UH Endowment Fund audit, the UH Downtown review procedures, and the agreed upon procedures for the Cancer Prevention Research Institute Texas grant. I'll start with the endowment fund. This is full audit completed under generally accepted auditing standards. We did not have any issues with the accounting principles or any of the procedures that the endowment fund undertakes as far as their accounting processes. Similar to prior years, we did not have any audit adjustments, no disagreements with management or any difficulties encountered while performing our audit. And again, we did issue an unmodified audit opinion on those financial statements like we have in the past several years. A big thank you to Raymond, Robbie, and the staff out there. They're very helpful as always. They are always very prepared for us on this engagement. We do appreciate their assistance. On the UH downtown review, just as a reminder, y'all, a review is much less in scope than an audit. You're not trying to give an opinion on the financial statements, but the objective is to state that they are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We tend to do, we do inquiry, observation, and analytical procedures only on what we look at. So the review report states that we are not aware of any material modifications that should be made to the financial statements in order for them to be in conformity with United States GAAP. We did have discussions with management on a few audit adjustment issues. Some of the discussions also centered around the adoption of GASB 68, the new pension standard. And on that, we do give thanks to George Anderson and his staff at UH Downtown. The third engagement was the cancer prevention grant procedures. This is agreed upon procedures, not unlike what Mr. Belt does for the NCAA. These procedures are provided to us by the granting agency to make sure that you guys are in compliance with the terms of the grant. We really didn't have any significant findings from these engagements. A few minor things that we discussed with management. They did agree with our minor findings. But like nothing of any significance really. And our thanks to their staff as well. Finally, David Ellis has been real helpful on several of these engagements and his staff as well. So we appreciate his help. That's what I've got. Any questions I can answer for you today?
Any questions for Mr. Kruger? Well, we appreciate you being here today and appreciate the report.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We have representatives of the management of each of these areas. If anyone has any specific questions for them, we have them here. We have the Patricia Paquin, the interim principal of the charter school. We have Jeff Collier, the CFO of the athletic department. We have Raymond Bartlett here to answer questions on the endowment fund, and David Ellis, the financial reporting, and David Bradley for the UHD SACS report. If any questions on those, we'll be glad to.
Any questions for any of those people? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for being here nonetheless.
Next item on the agenda, item H, on page 241 of your iPad, refers to the institutional compliance status report for the 3 months ended December 31st, 2015. This report lists activities which include risk assessments, compliance audits, compliance committee meetings, risk mitigation, and hotline reports. The remainder of the institutional compliance status report summarizes the information provided for each institution for their compliance functions. One item I wanted to bring to your attention is the last comment in the UH section on environmental health and life safety. That's on page 246. This comment refers to the lab management system being populated and the assessment of resources to address the increase in addition of research labs related to addition of floor space of the health-related activities and other research build-outs. This system should help this group manage the resources needed to comply with the various regulatory agencies for these different types of activities in these labs. It should also help assess the resources needed for compliance for the inspection of those labs. Do you have any questions on this report at all? No? All right. If not, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, item I. It's on page 254 of your iPad. This refers to the internal audit briefing booklet. First tab in the booklet contains an activity outline on page 257. As you can see from this outline, we had prepared 6 internal audit reports. This is the November Audit and Compliance Committee meeting. The executive summaries of these reports start on page 261 in the iPad, and the individual reports start on page 270. These reports address areas included in the board-approved audit plan and include departmental reviews of the College of Optometry and the UH Clear Lake School of Business, our annual football attendance certification, a report on UHD information standards, and a report on construction and other contracts requiring board approval, and also our follow-up activity. These reports will be submitted to the Governor's Office of Budget and Planning Legislative Budget Board and the Sunset Advisory Committee, and the state auditor as required by the Texas Government Code. Our reports on the departmental reviews contain management action plans, and they're included in the briefing booklet on page 266 of your iPad. An overview of all our recommendations are on page 264. Audit report number 13, our follow-up report, addresses the status of 42 action items and 19 individual reports. We verified that 25 of the action items have been implemented, 15 partially implemented, and 2 not implemented. Updated management responses were obtained on the partially implemented and not implemented action items. We have 2 high-risk items in this report related to UHD policies for receivable reconciliations and write-offs. That's on page 280 of that report. And they are now supposed to be implemented by March of 31st of 2016. Audit report number 14 on page 283 is our construction and other contracts requiring board approval. This is the standard report in our briefing booklet, similar to our follow-up status report. The objective of this review is to determine whether the UHS is complying with its policies and procedures and state statutes, particularly the Texas Education Code, and selecting contractors for its major construction projects and other contracts requiring board approval. This report covers the activity from October 1st through December 31st, 2015. Appendix 1 of that report on page 285 indicates the scope of our review. You can see on this appendix, internal audit has performed procedures on 11 of the projects listed. The dates listed on these appendix in red font are the dates added to the appendix since the report was last issued in November. We're going to change this up. It's just way too busy, and we'll maintain the integrity of this worksheet for our work, but I think what we'll do is we'll segregate this and make it a briefer listing where you can say these are in progress, or we have completed the work on these awards. So it's got just way too many things coming on here, and you can't. As Regent Welder said, he couldn't read it. I had to tell him what was happening. It was hard for me too, believe me. So we'll make sure this is an easier report to read and just give you the summary on it. Audit reports number 15 and 16 are departmental reviews of the Clear Lake School of Business and the UH College of Optometry. I normally introduce the deans, the dean of optometry and the associate dean are out of town, but I do have Sabrina Hassamani of the provost's office here if you have any questions about the optometry college. We noted no significant engagement observations with those reports. Audit report number 17, page 302 of the iPad, is our report on downtown security standards. We found that UHD fully complied with most of the state required standards. These reviews are required every 2 years, and we do all of the institutions' reviews. Audit report number 18 is our football attendance audit on page 304 of your iPad. This is required by the NCAA. You notice on page 2 of this report, it's on page 306, there's a table listing the paid attendance for each home game. This year's average attendance was 30,147. 147. Last year's was around 24,000. Do you have any questions on our follow-up activity or any of these reports? Referring back to the activity outline on page 257, items 2, 3, and 4 of the outline, we have various scheduled progress, field work in progress or in the planning phase. These audits are included in the board-approved audit plan for 2016. Item number 4, you can see we have various special projects in progress. The FEMA audits on Ike are still ongoing. Department of Education Title IV program review, we're still waiting to get the final response from them. And we have 2 external audits in progress. We have the public media, that'll be ready for the May meeting. And the comptroller has just initiated a post-payment audit on the system administration component. We also have our external IT risk assessment ongoing, and the auditors have already interviewed key management personnel, including the chancellor and the audit committee chair. And they should have their field work completed, and we should have a good document going forward to prioritize our IT projects, and we intend to have this group keep moving forward. Do you have any comments, Regent Welder, on that process?
Just that it's good to have this in process now. The group that has been hired has done this for a number of universities. They have a lot of expertise, and I think it's gonna really give us some good insight into our IT security. It's gonna be a very helpful process. So putting the plan together now, and once the plan is approved, then they'll come back and actually start testing. So if things work out like we hope, they'll be doing the auditing and testing for a period of about 5 years. And so I think they recruited a good firm to come in and do this.
Okay. Thank you, Regent Welder. You notice behind this, on the next page, is audit plan status. The shaded areas are the completed, and the footnotes indicate the status on the other areas. Any questions on that status? Next item on the agenda, item J, refers to that's page 308 on the iPad, refers to the certification of annual financial statements. The audit committee planner, item number 3.13, requires that the UH system chancellor and chief financial officer certify the annual financial statements for the UH system as a whole, and that each component president and chief financial officer certify the annual financial statements for their respective component. The agenda contains these certifications. Prior to the chancellor and vice chancellor of administration and finance signing their certifications, following steps took place. UH Clear Lake, Downtown, and Victoria chief accounting officers, chief financial officers, and presidents certified that their financial statements or financial reports for their campuses are true and correct to the best of their knowledge. And the UH system administrators and unit heads representing 136 departments completed the FY15 Department Fraud Risk Survey, which included questions about verifying cost center transactions, reporting instances of fraud and noncompliance, and other internal controls. According to the survey results, internal controls are adequate to ensure that the financial transactions created for FY15 by the UH and system administration departments are true and correct. Number 3, various responsible persons, including the CFO and chancellor, signed the certification letter for the system and the consolidated statements on the departmental surveys, which indicate controls are adequate within the system, and the certifications were signed by all other 3 campuses. Do you have any questions on those certifications? If not, that concludes my report. Regent.
Okay. Don, we appreciate that very much. Any questions for Don related to those audit reports?
We signed a IT risk assessment, 5-year contract. Do we have something similar in play for security in general on campus, where somebody's kind of testing that, and specifically maybe from a facility standpoint, all of our buildings, new and old, or do we have, is there an equivalent of that from a physical security standpoint, where somebody comes in and kind of tests that and kind of checks up on us from time to time?
No, I know they're in the process of automating, changing out the building security. Some of the buildings have card access, others do not, and that's part of the remediation going on. I guess I could get a comment from our facilities person on that. David Oliver, is he still here?
We are contracting with the card access project for all the security. So that is the company that we are looking forward to
So the answer to your question is no.
Yeah, well, I wonder if we ought to look into a similar firm like we got for the IT, maybe from a physical security standpoint, and see if there's some firm that comes in and tests that or from time to time and kind of advises on what's working or where we might be vulnerable.
Well, Don, could we ask you just to look at that and see what our peers are doing, if something like that is warranted? And maybe we can talk about it at the next meeting?
Well, I think we can, talk to the police chief too, because this would be kind
Sure.
of, you're talking about public safety. So we'll touch base with the police chiefs. We're going to be meeting with them anyway regarding system police operations. Maybe that's a good start.
Okay, good suggestion. Other questions? Okay, this concludes the presentations before the committee today. I would like to now move to executive session. And as I do that, I'll say that not to go far, it should be a brief executive session, because I know the next committee, Academic and Student Success, is going to want to get started right away, so don't go too far. The committee will now go into executive session pursuant to sections of the Texas Government Code listed on page 2 of your agenda. And Donna, who should stay for this executive session? Okay, I would like to reconvene the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting. The Regents met in executive session and discussed personnel issues. No action was taken in executive session. Does anyone have any further questions? If not, there being no further business to come before this committee, this meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you.